Hi, it's Doug DeVitri, host of the CoTrackPro podcast. Today we have a very special guest. She's with the Layne Project. Been serving in many roles as an attorney, as a social worker, as a parent coordinator, as an entrepreneur. She's got so many things going on. She's got many years experience in this business. Welcome, Trina. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Well, one of the things I found interesting about some of the work that you've done is that you've worn many of the hats, right? As far as the roles that are involved with the family ecosystem. Tell me how you got started in this.
Well, I originally started as a foster care social worker. I got really frustrated with the system. I came home, my then boyfriend, now husband, said, "Who makes a difference?" And I said, "Attorneys and judges." And little did he know that I then quit my job, and 3 months later, I started law school. I found out that the divorce arena was the child in need of care arena without any services in place. And that's what really started my journey.
Wow. And tell us so kind of what some of those services included.
Well, I felt like the child in need of care system had supports where there was supervised parenting time and there was parent education, and it was more focused on rehabilitation, right? Because they were trying to reintegrate children back into the home. But in the divorce arena, it was not moving forward. It wasn't based on the premise that necessarily, okay, the ideal is that the children have a happy, healthy relationship with both parents. Though the statute suggested that, there was no mechanism to actually move those families forward.
Yeah, no, interesting. It seems like as far as assessment goes and really understand what's going on behind the scenes, I can imagine that would be really difficult for judges.
Yeah, most definitely. I mean, the judges just have what's in front of them. And let's get real. Parents are not their best selves in the courtroom. So, what the judges actually see is not what may be really going on. And then we put these individuals into therapy and expect them to actually make shifts when they're already feeling shame, blamed, and judged, right? And they don't want to admit where they maybe have gone wrong because it might get used in front of, it might get used against them in court. Or we put them into platforms for documentation and they're more concerned about who's actually reading it. Is the judge reading this documentation, or is my attorney or the guardian ad litem? So they're already triggered when they're beginning to communicate. So the judge is only seeing people at their absolute worst, but wanting the best out of them.
Well, sure. And so, they have to write these documents or these motions to appear and they have to complete them all, right? And then they have to submit them. And then if there's any evidence that they're trying to track, I'm sure that can be, I'm just assuming that that's extremely overwhelming for both attorneys and judges.
Yeah, it's overwhelming for attorneys and judges, but it's so overwhelming for these parents as well. I mean, they want what's best for their kids. They truly do. But because of the fact that they feel like they're under the microscope, they are creating their own biggest fears. And so the court system isn't truly set up to help families move forward. Unfortunately, it's about who's right or wrong as opposed to getting it right for these families.
Well, that's really interesting, and I'm glad that you found there's an opportunity to help families deeper than what seems to be surface level. Tell us about the Layne Project and what that's all about.
So, for about 17 years, the Layne Project offered direct services to include supervised parenting time, supervised exchange, court involved therapy, custody evaluations. We run co parenting groups and things like that. In August of this year, I transitioned the infrastructure of the Layne Project over to For Families, which is a nonprofit organization which is allowing the Layne Project to pivot with purpose, and we are actually scaling our program called BeH2O, which is a 16-week co-parenting program. And we're now training coaches nationwide and how to run that program, as well as building a reflection tool fueled by AI that helps parents work through very difficult situations. So it really leans into human nature that they aren't at their best selves and helps them really delve down deep into their feelings and their needs and really what they want for their kids.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Tell me about some of the excuse me, core principles that you found to really for families to stick to.
Well, it's more like running a business. So it's interesting. BeH2O creates an operating system for co-parenting. I didn't know how to run a business, Doug. They didn't teach me it in law school. They didn't teach me it in the School of Social Welfare. I've fallen on my face more times than I can actually count. But what's really interesting is every time I fell on my face and I learned something more about running a business, it translated amazingly into teaching co-parents how to co-parent. And so the core, I guess, principle is EOS, the Entrepreneur Operating System. Both of my companies run on that. One of the key components of that is a vision. So what is our why? What are we trying to truly ultimately achieve for our kids? And if we can really use our why as our North Star and really decide what are boundaries that we need to create and have those boundaries created within our goals as opposed to being rooted in our fears, we can really propel forward. Um, we also, people feel shame, blamed, and judged. Let's not try to ignore that, right? We're in the system, we're feeling shame, blamed, and judged, and guess what? Our co-parent does too. We are both absolutely human. So it's not looking at the problem, look, as the person as the problem. It's actually looking at the system. So we're trying to change one another. And guess what? If we could change one another, we would have never gotten separated. So as opposed to being disappointed day in and day out that your co-parent hasn't changed and won't change, then what can I do to not undermine my why? How can I embody the values that I wish to instill in our children?
That's really great. And you've talked about the parents, you've talked about the providers. What about the kids, right? Like, do you recommend kids getting involved in some of these decision makings? After all, they're the ones who have to experience it and live it.
I think there's a difference between getting the kids involved and um, having their voice heard. So if a child wanted to eat chocolate for breakfast, lunch, and dinner and never go to the dentist, right? Because they're absolutely scared of the dentist, it's really important to understand the child is scared to go to the dentist, right? So then are we going to really have the child go to the dentist on their birthday? No. Are we going to have the child go to the dentist in the morning if they're not a morning person? No. But the idea is the child doesn't have a choice whether or not to go to the dentist. The child doesn't have a choice whether or not they have to eat some healthy foods. But if they eat these healthy foods, we may give them chocolate. So a child informed approach
Mm.
is what I really think is most paramount.
That's really great. And let's talk about access. One parent has the child, and then the other parent is trying to access them, whether by phone or now we have video that we can communicate, or maybe it's email, text. I don't know. You tell me what do you see most effective in having access when you can't be physically present?
Well, it depends on the cost of that access and who that access is actually for. So, a lot of times, parents will fight over phone contact with the children. I don't know. I have four kids, and they don't think that the phones are used for actually talking on the phone. Like, so the child doesn't want to talk on the phone. It's more the parent that wants to talk to the child. So I really take the focus of let's meet the child where the child is at. So I had a case where, right, wrong, or otherwise, no shame, blame, or judgment here, the child was on Snapchat. And that was a means that the child was communicating, and the child wasn't getting in contact with dad. But the child loved streaks in their Snapchat. That was something they never wanted a streak to die in their Snapchat. So, dad, guess what? He wants to connect with his child. Child is really into Snapchat. So, what did we do? Dad, child, I want you to start snapping each other every day, and let's see how long that streak can go. There was more connection in those snaps than a phone call every night could have established. So we get started in our why. What are we really trying to achieve here? And then guess what? We start to get curious. But when we're stuck on phone calls, that's the what. That's how it needs to happen. Is we need to have phone calls. We undermine what we're actually trying to achieve.
That's really great. My son came to me when he was 5 and said, "Daddy, can I play Minecraft?" And I didn't know what it was. And then he ended up learning how to do it. And then we created virtual servers for kids to get together during the pandemic. So I'll never forget, I sat down next to him because he wanted me to play. And that was the first time he put his arm around me. Like I was now in his world, playing Minecraft. Let's talk about some of these other solutions and apps that you have, in the works, or maybe it's the process behind the apps that you think is really necessary for this family ecosystem.
Well, we really talked a lot about starting from the why, and that's kind of where the app version is. Be Aligned is it will be released on September 30th, so we're really excited about that. It really leans into human nature as opposed to trying to fight it. So I already said parents aren't at their best selves. They're not. So let's stop trying to pretend like they're supposed to be. So how are they feeling? So it takes them through a seven-step process about how is that parent actually feeling? And these are private. So the court or the attorneys or the professionals, they ultimately can get certificates of reflection to say, mom, dad, whomever spent an hour and a half on Be Aligned over this month, but they're not getting access to the process. So through the reflection process. So now we've got parents who are entering into a system and they're not already feeling judged by that, right? And so they're identifying how they're truly feeling because oftentimes we try to ignore our feelings. Well, actually, we can learn a lot from our feelings. So, how are we feeling? And what do we really need? What is our why? Truly, what are we trying to achieve here? And then it encourages them to step into the shoes of their co parent, not agree with their co parent. They're not going to agree with their co parent. But guess what? Their co parent has feelings too. So, what might their co parent be feeling? I don't know. He doesn't have feelings. Okay, let's push a little bit further. Then, what might your co parent need, right? And then it goes into their child. What might their child be feeling? What might their child be needing? So just like the Snapchat example, Doug, now we have everyone's whys. So now let's get curious. And how might we be able to resolve this issue that is before us today? Understanding each of these perspectives. How can we actually achieve this? So it takes the curriculum, the BeH2O curriculum that has evolved over the past 10 plus years and served hundreds of families. It takes it, and it's not just AI. It's a trained AI based on a research-based curriculum. So people are, let's spend AI on this and AI on this. And I love me some AI, Doug. Like seriously, I love me some AI. But I have typed into AI a question and I thought I was going into my app. I got scared. I got really scared because what came out, I'm like, oh my goodness, no. Please never tell a parent that, please. So you just really need to be careful. It's not, AI oftentimes has a tendency, in my experience, to inflate your ego, right? It's going to validate where you're coming from, oftentimes, and then it's going to end up getting you more stuck. So you have to, it's been a very tedious journey actually training the AI. But
Sure.
what's amazing about the AI is you can train in the AI to not have the biases that
Mhm.
professionals that I train have. So professionals that I train, I can teach them to be aware of their biases and how to work around them, but they still exist. And over time, what I found is very well meaning, well intentioned professionals unintentionally polarize families. So, if we can encapsulate this and train the AI like I've done, then we can help move families forward without that downfall.
Gosh, that's so great. There's so many parties to this. I don't know what to call it, a transaction. Maybe we call it this healing, right? That the parents are going through. How do you get collaboration from everyone to participate?
So, Doug, this has been really, really an evolution for me. I'm going to be version 5.0 this year, so that's translated into 50. I used to think that I knew everything, but now I'm smart enough to know that I don't know anything, right? There's always more to learn. Um, Rewind, maybe even 10 years ago. I unfortunately was utilizing my why to undermine my why. That's crazy. What are you talking about, Trina? Well, my mission has always been safeguarding childhoods, always. And when parents would come into my office, I'd be like, why would you do this to your kids? Right? I'd approach them with shame, blame, and judgment. And then they would leave my office more dysregulated than they entered, and I wanted them to be their best selves. So then I started to see them and understand they weren't doing these things in spite of their kids. They were doing it for their kids and they were scared. So I started to see them. And guess what? They started to engage with me. Professionals are no different, Doug. So, professionals, guardian ad litems, therapists, judges, attorneys, we all are trying to do our absolute best, but we don't know what we don't know. And so,
Mm.
that person in front of me, whomever it is, they have to feel seen. And once they feel seen, they start to lean in. And so then we're able to pull everyone together because I can actually hear what their why is, right? Because I'm listening finally to understand, not respond. I'm listening to what the parents' why is. I'm listening now to what the court's why is, and how can I put all these pieces together and propose solutions that move them forward?
Wow, that's really amazing. You know, and going back to the child, the things that are most important for them are their sta safety and their stability. What would you suggest to parents right now who are dealing with an overloaded schedule, and then now this conflict?
So I'll go through an example. So I do still practice a handful of attorney cases. So I'm representing this dad. And the dad was very beside himself because he, through the grapevine heard that his co-parent was drinking and driving with his girls. So we
Mm.
took it to court and the court did nothing about it. And so dad is saying, I don't know what to do. I don't know what to do. And I was like, well, what's your biggest fear? And he said, well, my children's safety. And I said, okay, so what are you going to do that without shaming or blaming or judging mom in front of your girls? And he goes, I don't know, Trina. I guess teach him about drinking and driving and how it's wrong. And I said, I do one step above that. I would make every effort when you go out to put a spotlight on the fact that you are not drinking and driving. So I'm having a margarita. Hey, wife, will you please drive? Or both
Mm.
of us had margaritas. Kids, we're going to drive, we're going to call an Uber because we both had a margarita. So now we're embodying our values, their values of not drinking and driving and safety and living that out. So now they can begin to instill that in their children. So, why do I say that? You talked about busy schedules and all of this going on. Really, if we can really fine tune and drill down on what are our values, what's most important, what are the top three that we want to instill in our children, and have that be our guide going forward, we're going to save a lot of time. We're going to save a lot of stress. And once your values align, I promise you the next step becomes clear. And that's my evolution as a professional. That's what I'm trying to now. I know the power of it now. So that's why I'm so excited about bringing parents in that same way. It's just how you would successfully run a business.
Yeah, and I'm thinking, I'm trying to ask myself how many attorneys would ask that question, right? Like, what are your values? What if, it's like it's such a simple question, but it's probably one of the most important for decision making.
But it's not only the attorneys asking a client that, it's attorneys asking themselves that. So
Mm.
once they begin asking themselves that, so one of my values, once I started to drill down on it, was actually self-actualization. It was truly, I truly believe that individuals can self-actualize and become their best selves. But as a guardian ad litem or a custody evaluator, I was telling parents how to do things. I was not inspiring in them how to achieve the things themselves. So once your values align, the next step follows. So I had no choice but to train professionals how to do BeH2O or to create BeAligned and work myself out of the practice of law.
That's so great. And so remind me about the different programs you have for the different people that you serve, just so I can make sure we've got this as notes for people to follow up.
So the programs presently that I'm turned my focus on once we move direct services over to the nonprofit, it's BeH2O. It's a 16-week co-parenting curriculum. I have 14 coaches now nationwide who are putting on the programming. You can attend individually or jointly with your co-parent. And it is immersive. It's 16 weeks. Why 16 weeks? Well, I started it as 8 weeks, Doug. And believe it or not, my court-ordered participants said it wasn't long enough. They didn't want to be here in the first place. And we started it in 2014 and 2020. They said it wasn't long enough, so we moved it to 16 weeks. Why? Because the research has proven that the changes aren't happening until week 6 to 10. Well, it takes 66 days to form a habit, so no surprise. So my coaches now, it's not just for families running the program, it's my coaches running it. And then Be Aligned is going to be introduced into the world the day that I turn 5.0. So on September 30th. And that is a tool to, I know you have CoTrackPro. It's a tool that can be used adjacent to that. It is not meant to replace any of these existing tools. It's prior to opening CoTrackPro, then let me go in to Be Aligned, truly process my feelings, and then what I put into that app, guess what? Is going to be modeling the values I wish to instill in my children rather than my fears, throwing my fears out into the world.
Well, that's so great. And I really appreciate you putting the effort into creating a system, right, that somebody can follow as opposed to maybe just hosting sessions with just a PDF, right? Or printed paper that, nobody knows what happened after the session. So I think that's really great.
Thank you.
What would you say is the best way to connect with you after this podcast?
The best way to connect with me is you can go on to www.thelayneproject.com. It has links to the BeH2O co-parenting program for parents. It has links to the BeH2O coaching for professionals. The link will be live on the Be Aligned app starting September 30th, or you can just email me at Trina, Trina, at the Layne Project, LAYNE.com. And I am more than happy to set up a call, talk about it, share any information, brainstorm, because like I said, I'm smart enough to know I don't know everything. So I promise you, I'm going to learn as much from you from that call as you're going to learn from me.
That's so great. And if there was one takeaway you'd recommend to co-parents, what's the one thing or the first thing that comes to mind?
Is to embody the values you wish to instill in your children. If you're not living those out consistently in your interactions with your co-parent and others, you are minimizing the likelihood that your children are going to live them out. So let's say your value is kindness. Don't be kind to your co-parent because they deserve kindness. That's too hard. Be kind to your co-parent because your children deserve the best example of kindness.